Nobody has a miscarriage and says, I lost my blob of tissue. Hello, welcome back to the Stand Firm Project. My name is Dr. Nick Emmel. I am the proud father of 7 children and the proud husband of a wonderful wife, Lauren. And I'm overjoyed to be able to share this message with you today. One of my earliest childhood memories was actually a rather sad one. I remember I was just 5 or 6 years old and my mother had a miscarriage. I remember my parents really struggling through it, but they named the child. We had a prayer service at the cemetery, and my parents purchased a small gravestone. It was very difficult for them. It was hard for us. In particular, it was difficult for my mom. But before we buried the child, I was able to see it. And that baby had little hands and feet. I could see ribs and fingers and toes. It was fascinating and beautiful. What is often hidden within the womb and the mystery of pregnancy was revealed in this tragic moment. And I'm really grateful that my parents shared this with me, as difficult as it was. My parents have been active members of the pro-life movement forever. And they shared that with me, and I took that memory and the experiences I had in the pro-life movement, and as a junior in high school, I attended the March for Life in Washington, D.C. for the very first time. It was life-changing. And like many of you, I spent much of my childhood and my young adult life just wondering if I'd ever see a post-Roe v. Wade era. Because of my experience going on the March for Life in high school and my parents handing on this love for the pro-life movement, I began 14 years ago taking students on the March for Life to Washington, D.C. And since then, I've been very blessed to lead thousands of students and start a few different pilgrimages to the March for Life. Over the years, I've realized that young people are overwhelmingly pro-life. The pro-life movement is not filled with older people stuck in the past, but rather it's full of young people, men and women, looking to the future. As one of my mentor teachers says, nobody has a miscarriage and says, I lost my blob of tissue. Instead, they say, I lost my baby. The biology is clear. It's a human being. At conception, it has its own DNA. It's a self-assembling human life. And I think Americans fail to realize that we have some of the most grisly abortion laws in the whole world. There are few countries that have third-term abortions, or states that, like we do, that have abortion that's legal after a child's due date, or states that you don't have to resuscitate a child that's born in a botched abortion. So I'd like to just ask a few questions to help you perhaps to consider how to speak about this topic and how to share in the pro-life movement and the truth of the matter. So a couple of questions to clarify the reality of human life and this issue. You might ask, if it's not a human being, then what is it? Or when does it become a human being? If it's a woman's body or a choice, why does it have its own DNA and heartbeat? If it isn't alive, well, why is it growing? If it's merely a blob of tissue, what does that even mean? I'm a 200-pound blob of tissue. If it isn't human, well, what are its parents? I think it's helpful for every pro-life person to consider this question when they're speaking with those who are pro-choice. Ask them, what does abortion do to an unborn child? How might they respond? Everyone, abortion doesn't merely end a pregnancy. It directly, intentionally destroys a human life. And the answers to these questions become so obvious because we know that life begins at conception. And if we can't protect the unborn in one of the most vulnerable places that ought to be the most nurturing place on earth, a mother's womb, well then, who can we protect? And every human life is at risk. I also say, if you haven't seen what abortion does to a healthy human child, you should look up an image, look at several. And you might say, oh, well, that's disturbing. And I respond, that's because abortion is disturbing. Also, the extreme should never legalize the norm. If we passed laws like that, it'd be okay to steal all vehicles because it might be necessary in an extreme situation. Or we'd be all right with breaking into anyone's house for the sake of the situation where it might be necessary to break and enter into someone's house to help them. One that I frequently hear is, what about rape? And that is obviously a very serious and awful thing to consider for anyone. But I happen to know someone whose mother was raped and she was conceived. And she says this, why should a child receive the death penalty for a crime her father committed? The second thing I'd like to do is just address the danger of neutrality, especially on an issue so fundamental as this. I've heard people say, nobody likes abortion, but it should be a woman's choice. And how can we pass legislation on morality? Well, the simple answer is we pass legislation on morality all the time. I live in a wonderful city where I'm not afraid to walk out to my car on the way to work and look over my shoulder because I might be the victim of a drive-by shooting. Why am I not afraid in this way? Because we legislate morality. The other thing I want to point out is doing nothing is still choosing something. We must always take sides. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, he said, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. German Protestant theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. And he stood up for the rights of human beings in his time that were oppressed by the Nazi regime. Instead, I think that evil is often the byproduct of misguided empathy or the result of silence. So it's important for us to speak up, to know a few arguments, to be able to ask some serious questions in order to bring others to the truth of this topic. I don't really think that people in the abortion industry wake up each morning thinking, how can I hurt women, dads, children? In fact, I've spoken with people in the abortion industry, and they often claim that they're trying to help people. Many of them are victims of the effects of abortion themselves. And so I argue we must treat them with utmost respect, but we still have to be bold proclaimers of the truth. And we have to celebrate life in all of its stages. So this is a heavy topic. You might ask yourself, well, what can I do? Not everyone can travel with 200 high school students per year to Washington, D.C. for the March for Life. I say celebrate life encourage, love, and support those who are expecting a child, even if it's a difficult situation. Because let's face it, if a woman is pregnant, the baby's already here. And so we need to support both children and moms and support dads. We got to support them all. You could help someone. Maybe you're the first person that someone tells that they're pregnant, and you could connect them with pregnancy help centers all over this country. What can you do? Pray. You can pray. This is seriously a spiritual issue, and it's also a social issue. This is the civil rights and human rights issue of our time. Prayer. This is definitely a spiritual battle. In fact, Dr. Peter Kraft says, is it any wonder that one of the most common slogans for a pro-abortion movement is, "It's my body"? Those same words said by the right person change bread to God. This is clearly both a spiritual battle and a human rights and civil rights battle. What can you do? You can share this video with others. Learn a few questions to ask those who are of the pro-choice movement, the pro-abortion movement, and engage in respectful, meaningful dialogue with people. Everyone, the truth is strong enough to be scrutinized. There are answers to every one of the pro-choice arguments and their inconsistencies. You know, at various times in my life, I never thought I'd see beyond the Roe versus Wade era, but here we are. And I wholeheartedly think that in my lifetime, abortion will be unthinkable. But if it is, you and I realize that our grandchildren, our children and their kids are going to ask us some really serious questions. They're going to say things like, "Grandpa, were you alive when abortions were happening? Were you in a city where they had abortion facilities?" Those are going to be really difficult questions. And the most serious of all the questions, they're going to ask us, "Grandpa, what did you do about it?" And so we stand up for life. We boldly proclaim the truth that every human life should be dignified. Every human being should be respected. Every mom, dad, and baby should be loved and supported. And we stand up for the unborn child. And we stand up for truth about the dignity of every human life. So thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Stand Firm Project.